This is Lecture 60B, continuation of our discussion of the overseas Chinese. And this is for the last chapter in the book, Volume 3, Communism in East Asia, in the ABCs of Communism series, Bolshevism 2018. And I made the overseas community of Chinese into a completely separate chapter from where all of the other chapters deal with the countries of East Asia. The overseas community of Chinese constitutes an equivalently important group in terms of wealth and power to any of the national groups, an important secondary adjunct to the People's Republic of China and its current Road and Belt program. So the road to the One Belt, One Road program is the subject of today's lecture, and the development of nuclear China and then its imperial feudal sequences we have reviewed several times in volumes 1 and 3. The capitalist coast of South China reached outward over the 2 millennia since the collapse of the Han Empire. The road to Obor, O-B-O-R, or One Belt, One Road, has been a Hope and Crosby tragicomedy in one sense. Understanding the way that history unfolded is critical to a Marxist comprehension of the greatest event of the 21st century, which is the road to One Belt, One Road, or OBOR, or the current Silk and Belt program connecting socialist China with Asia, Africa, and Europe, and is being built simultaneously with the collapse of the U.S. imperialist hegemony over the world capitalist stage. Now, nearly 1,000 years passed after the collapse of the Han regime in China, in which the south coast of China from Shanghai to Canton developed capitalism in its own way. These characteristics of Chinese capitalism featured extreme secrecy in all business dealings, camouflage of personal family, clan, and sodality wealth was an intimate corollary, and extension of real estate holdings far beyond the Chinese national borders was essential to both secrecy and camouflage. All along the way, there was the ongoing intra-ruling class war between the feudal landowning great families of the north and the bourgeois magnates of the south. These were the two great political parties of China's 2,000-year post-Han history. As you've seen, the roots of this struggle extended into the history of pre-Qin China. Now, two great battles would be fought between the two contending parties that determined the course of Chinese history before the Bolshevik Revolution and its spread to China. The first of these centered on the adventures of Sanbao, S-A-N-B-A-O, and his great fleet. The second battle was actually a series of opium wars of the mid-1800s. We shall begin this explication with the story of Sanbao, the sailing eunuch admiral, as the first turning point for the overseas Chinese. First, capitalist magnates from the south coast had won a critical battle when they managed to get their man, Ma Sanbao, appointed as the chief admiral of the imperial fleet. Ma was born in AD 1371. He became famous as a Hui, that is H-U-I, Chinese mariner, explorer, diplomat, and fleet admiral. He commanded expeditionary voyages to Southeast Asia, South Asia, Western Asia, and East Africa from AD 1405 to 1433. His larger ships stretched 120 meters or more in length, carrying hundreds of sailors on 4 tiers of decks. Ma was the original Sinbad the Sailor, who helped the Beijing Duke Zhu Di, spelled Z-H-U-D-I, or Zhu Dai, seize power to become the third Ming emperors. Ma was of south coastal Hui stock, H-U-I, and rose to the top of the imperial hierarchy, beginning his early years as a soldier and eventual commander of Zhu Dai's southern capital at Nanjing. After his coup, Zhu Dai, calling himself the Yongle Emperor, later moved his Nanjing capital to Beijing. Now, Ma's voyages have become well known in China and abroad since the 1904 publication of Liang Jiao's biography of our homeland's great navigator Zheng He. which is a name that Ma later acquired and we'll talk about in a minute. Born into a Muslim family, Ma became a Mohammedan apostate, adopting the practical faith of the goddess of sailors called Tianfei, Tinfei. Now, Ma was a great-great-great-grandson of Sayyid Ajal Shams al-Din Omar, who served in the administration of the preceding Mongol Empire and was the governor of Yunnan during the early Yuan dynasty. His great-grandfather Bayan had been stationed at the Mongol garrison in Yunnan and had made the pilgrimage to Mecca, and this explains why Ma could speak Arabic. In the autumn of AD 1381, a Ming army invaded and conquered Yunnan province, then ruled by the Mongol Basolawami Prince of Liang. In 1381, Ma's father died in the fighting between the Ming armies and the Mongol forces, and he was buried in Kunming, and in his capacity as admiral, Ma had an epitaph engraved in honor of his father, composed by the Minister of Rites at the Duanwu festival in June AD 1405. Castration. Now, as you know, castration of scholar bureaucrats who ran the economic administration and the military was a well-established practice of Chinese ruling families, the idea being that in this way bureaucrats could not build family dynasties. All bureaucrats steal, so with their access to money, they would otherwise do exactly that. So when the Ming armies had Yunnan captured Ma as a 10-year-old boy in AD 1381, he was soon castrated and sold into servitude to the 21-year-old Zhu Dai, Duke of Yan, or Beijing. Now, career paths. After AD 1380, Duke Zhu Dai had been governing Beijing, located near the northern frontier where the hostile Mongol tribes were situated, and Ma spent his teens as a soldier on the northern frontier, participating in Zhu Dai's military campaigns against the Mongols. On the 2nd of March in AD 1390, Ma accompanied Zhu Dai when he commanded his first expedition. It produced a great victory, and the Mongol commander surrendered and Zhu Dai was on the political fast track. Ma had also gained the confidence and trust of Zhu Dai. The young eunuch eventually became a trusted advisor to the Duke, and Zhu Dai confronted the reality that he had earned the jealousy and fear of the emperor. His career, and his life for that matter, depended on killing the emperor and seizing power. Helping him with the most critical details was his eunuch advisor, Ma Sanbao. Ma was instrumental as a general for the Duke and later would help in a palace coup against the second Ming emperor. The mechanics of the coup revolved around the AD 1399 to 1402 Jingnan campaign, which ended with the emperor's death and the rise to imperial boss of Zhu Dai, Prince of Jian, who called himself now the Yongle Emperor. Ma, as an adult, was 8 feet tall and had a waist that was 5 feet in circumference. His cheeks and forehead were high on a face with a small nose, glaring eye, and white teeth, with a voice that was as loud as a bell. In AD 1398, the Xiaofan policy stripped the fiefdom bosses of their military forces. In August of 1399, Zhu Dai openly rebelled against the second Ming emperor, and on the Duke's behalf, Ma successfully defended Beijing's city reservoir called Zhenglumba against the second emperor's armies. In January 1402, Duke Zhu Dai launched his military campaign to capture the imperial capital at Nanjing. Ma was the Duke's principal commander of that expedition. Zhu Dai's armies defeated the imperial forces and marched into Nanjing on 13 July 1402. Zhu Dai accepted the elevation to being the third Ming emperor 4 days later. After ascending the throne, he promoted Ma as the Grand Director, Taijian, of the Directorate of Palace Servants, which was the secret intelligence service. On 11 February 1404, Zhu Dai, as the third Ming emperor, confirmed the name Zheng He, Z-H-E-N-G-H-E, upon Ma. Zheng He, which we'll use that from now on, served in the highest posts as Director of the Secret Intelligence Service and Grand Admiral of Exploratory Sea Voyages. In this capacity, he directed 7 of these voyages on behalf of the Emperor, all devoted to trading and collecting tribute in the Eastern Pacific and Indian Ocean. Now, the 6 voyages, the first 6. Mongol-ruled China had greatly increased the role of the capitalist class of South China. Sino-Arab trade during the AD 1300s had increased Chinese knowledge of the world. Maps of the world previously only displaying China and its surrounding seas began to expand further and further to include South Asia, Arabia, and Africa. The overthrow of the Mongol Yuan regime and the ascension of the first 2 Ming dictators consolidated the Chinese feudal regime in the north. And the 3rd Ming emperor restarted the foreign expeditions, expanding China's world imperial reach. So between 1405 and 1424, the 3rd Ming emperor sponsored 6 naval expeditions, beginning by imposing imperial control over the Indian Ocean trade, and along the way the emperor impressed foreign peoples in the Indian Ocean basin and enforced the mandatory tribute system of the empire, meaning everybody had to pay. Zheng He was the admiral in control of a huge fleet fully equipped with tiger-masked naval infantry, that is, Marines. Vice Admiral Wang Jinghong was appointed his second in command, and preparations were thorough and wide-ranging. A foreign language institute equipped with a publishing house was set up in Nanjing, a convenient location given the presence in Nanjing of the Admiralty and the Dragon Bay shipyard, where most of the imperial fleet war and cargo ships were built. On the 11th of July of 1405, Zheng He's first voyage departed from the Dragon Bay shipyard at Suzhou, and it consisted of 317 ships manned by 28,000 crewmen that, fully deployed, sailed from horizon to horizon. They would visit over the 6 voyages some 37 countries of South Asia and East Africa. This nearly a century before Cristobal Colon and his pitiful tiny 50-foot-long boats barely reached the Bahamas. Now, Zheng He's warships were 170 feet long and 60 feet wide. His cargo ships ranged from 300 to 440 feet long and were 190 feet wide. Without doubt, Zheng He had the most modern world naval technology of that time, with 62 ships of 500-man crews making up the heavy fleet. Each ship was lacquered with white lime with infused poisonous oil to protect the wood from parasites of any kind, and not only were his ships larger than any other ships in the world, but far more numerous than all the rest of the ships in the world combined. They had watertight compartments, the lee and counterboards, the windlass, and the slotted rudder. Freshwater tankers were constantly replenished, and Chinese muds added to keep the flora and fauna the same for human and animal passengers. Of the latter, there were special stable ships for horses of the dragoons, that is, mounted infantry, and cavalry. Experienced Chinese merchant mariners did navigation with highly classified rudders, that is, navigational guides drawn from experience. Magnetic compasses of needles floating in water were of the most modern types. The officer at NCO Corps came from the Secret Intelligence Service of trusted eunuchs. Although Zheng He's armada was unprecedented, the routes were not. For more than 1,000 years, the mercantile capitalists of South China had been trading in the South Seas. Zheng He's fleet was following long-established, well-mapped routes of trade between China and the Arabian Peninsula, and it had been employed since at least the Han Dynasty. During the Three Kingdoms period, the King of Wu sent a 20-year-long diplomatic mission led by Zhu Ying and Kang Tai along the coast of Asia, which has reached as far as the Eastern Roman Empire. After centuries of disruption, The Song dynasty restored large-scale maritime trade from China in the South Pacific and Indian Oceans, reaching as far as the Arabian Peninsula and East Africa. So when Zheng He's fleet first arrived in Malacca, there was already a sizable Chinese community. The General Survey of the Ocean Shores, called Yingya Shenglan in Chinese, composed by the translator Ma Wan in AD 1416, gave very detailed accounts of his observations of people's customs and lives in the ports they visited, and he referred to the expatriate Chinese as Tang peoples, Tang Grin. Zheng He's use of crewmen that were regular military personnel shows that his expeditions were meant to spread China's power via naval expansion. Zheng He's fleets visited Brunei, Java, Thailand, and Southeast Asia, and India, the Horn of Africa, and Arabia, dispensing and receiving goods along the way. Zheng He presented gifts of gold, silver, porcelain, and silk, and in return, China received such novelties as ostriches, zebras, camels, and ivory from the Swahili. 2 giraffes Zheng He brought back from Somalia he considered a kilin, and as proof of the favor of heaven on the voyages. The Ming dynasty not only bought giraffes from the Somali merchants, but many exotic animals, including zebras. Opium derivatives, incense, and aphrodisiacs were highly valued once Chinese consumers became aware of them. Zheng He sought to attain his goals through diplomacy, with a large military obviously at the ready that awed most would-be enemies into submission. He ruthlessly suppressed pirates who had long plagued Chinese and Southeast Asian waters, defeating Chen Zuyi, the most feared and respected pirate captain. He captured him and returned him to China for execution. He also waged a land war against the kingdom of Kati on Ceylon and made displays of military force when local officials threatened his fleet in Arabia and East Africa. From his 4th voyage, he brought envoys from 30 states who traveled to China and paid their respects at the Ming court. In AD 1424, Admiral Zheng He traveled to Palembang for the emperor to appoint Shi Jisun pacification commissioner. And on August 12th of 1424, the 3rd Ming emperor and Zheng He's closest friend died. On 7 September 1424, a month later, Zhu Gaozi had inherited the throne while Zheng He was gone to Palembang, and this ascension of Zhu Dai's son as the 4th Ming emperor was a victory for the landed nobility, and the ocean voyages were discontinued. Zheng He was removed as head of the navy and sent to Nanjing, the southern capital of the empire, to complete its porcelain tower. This enormous pagoda was then called the Wonder of the World. On 15 May 1426, the emperor reprimanded Zheng He over costs involved in the porcelain tower construction. Now this was just the excuse to remove him as a political power altogether and permanently. In 1430, the emperor appointed Zheng He to command over a 7th and final expedition into the Western Ocean, that is what we call the Indian Ocean today, with the profits going to him directly, that is to the emperor. In 1431, Zheng He was demoted in title to Sanbao Taijian, using part of his old name, and in 1435, the great admiral died. Now we come to the second turning point, capitalism and imperialism for the overseas Chinese community. And it faced this second great turning point with the coming of British imperialism to Canton. British drug merchants began by buying Chinese tea on credit in Canton. Then they sold opium from their newest acquisition in India to overseas Chinese businessmen who paid them in silver for the drug that was worth more than gold back home, and the Brits could then pay their Canton debts with that silver. Now, in this way, there was no drain on UK gold and silver holdings. and since much of the cash held by Brit drug traffickers ended up back home in London or Scotch banks, the actual financial result was quite positive for the Anglo Empire. Getting super rich along with the English traffickers were their comprador overseas Chinese, who now became a real threat to the Beijing-based feudal empire. Civil war was inevitable, and it broke out in the form of the Taiping Rebellion. This civil war was by far the bloodiest in the 1800s, with 70 to 100 million people dead and wounded. The second bloodiest war of the 19th century was in North America, and that was only 1 million lost on both Union and Slavocrat sides. What these two wars have in common is that they're both civil wars fought between an outdated socio-cultural system and capitalism. The Taiping Rebellion, or the Taiping Civil War, or the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom movement, whatever you want to call it, was a massive rebellion or civil war in China that lasted from 1850 to 1864. It was nominally between the Manchu Qing Empire and the millenarian movement of the Heavenly Kingdom of Peace. The real contenders were the feudal lords versus the bourgeois capitalists and their bumpkin allies. On January 1st of 1851, hostilities began when the Imperial Green Standard Army launched an attack against the God-worshipping society at the town of Jintian in Guangxi province. Local officials had launched a campaign of religious persecution against a millenarian sect known as the God-worshipping society led by Hong Shu Quan. This gentleman believed himself to be the younger brother of Jesus Christ. Hong declared himself the heavenly king of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom of Peace, from which comes the term Taipings. In September 1851, the Taipings began marching north to escape the empire's forces closing in on them. The goal of the insurgents were religious, nationalist, and political. Publicly, they sought the conversion of the Chinese people to the Taiping's vision of Christianity. Politically, they wanted to overthrow the imperial regime of the feudal lords and ladies. To do this, they had to have a wholesale transformation of China and take state power, that is the army and police, away from the feudalists. On the 19th of March of 1853, the Taipings captured the city of Nanjing, and Hong declared it the heavenly capital of his kingdom. Subsequently, combat occurred first in the provinces of Jiangsu, Zhejiang, Anhui, Jiangxi, and Hubei. Over the next 14 years, the Taiping army had marched through every province of China proper except Gansu. The war was the largest in China since the Qing conquest in 1644, and for a decade the Taiping occupied and fought across much of the middle and lower Yangtze Valley. This was some of the wealthiest and most productive lands in the Qing Empire. So in May 1853, the Taiping Northern Expedition almost captured the imperial capital of Beijing. In June 1953, the rebels' Western Expedition did take large parts of Anhui, Jiangxi, and Hubei provinces. Qing imperial troops had proven unable to stop Taiping's advances and bogged down defensively under siege at Nanjing. The empire was in clear and present danger of defeat when, as luck would have it, in Hunan province, a local irregular army saved their day. Called the Hunan Army, it came to the empire's rescue under the personal leadership of a man named Zhong Guofen. Zhong's army became the main armed force fighting for the empire against the Taiping, and General Zhong blocked the Taiping advance in the west. In 1856, the East Kingdom boss, Yang Zhu-jing, weakened the Taiping regime with a coup attempt, assisted by Zhong's Special Action Intelligence Cadre. During this time, the Hunan army managed to gradually retake much of Hubei and Jiangxi province. In May of 1860, the Taiping defeated the imperial forces besieging Nanjing. Now, this cleared the way for an invasion of southern Jiangxi and Zhejiang provinces, the wealthiest region of the empire. The Taiping High Command was excited at the prospect of gaining the upper hand in the war and probably forcing the empire to sue for peace, and they moved their forces precipitously into Jiangsu province. On the 5th of September 1861, General Zhang took advantage of Taiping preoccupation in Jiangsu and moved his main force down the Yangtze River, capturing Anqing. Then, on the 1st of June 1864, Hong died under mysterious circumstances. On 19th of July 1864, Nanjing fell to Zhongguofan. He and his captains, Li Hongzhang and Zhuo Zongtang, were new warlords, and they were celebrated as saviors of the Qing Empire and became some of the most powerful men in late 1800s China. The last Taiping loyalist, Wang Haiyang, was defeated on January 29, 1866. Now we come to the third great turning point, the overseas Chinese investment community today. People's Daily from July 19, 2017 has the following article, which I've quoted pretty much in full. China's well-funded Belt and Road Initiative has rolled out with thousands of Chinese enterprises going all out in the vast new market created by participating countries and beyond. The vast overseas market will become a giant pool of capital with trillions of dollars of overseas investment and financing in the coming year, experts projected. Chinese investments overseas have been growing at a double-digit rate over the past 10 years. By 2016, some 30,000 Chinese companies have marched overseas with a total investment of $1.2 trillion, including outward foreign direct investment at $183.2 billion. In 5 years, that figure is expected to rise to $750 billion annually, revealed Zhou Xiaofei, a director at the National Development and Reform Commission, NDRC. Zhou made the remarks at the Chinese firm's Going Abroad 50 Forum, organized by the Counselor's Office of the State Council. The forum was contracted to the Center for China and Globalization, or CCG. Zhou also pointed out that private companies make up 60% of the Chinese companies in the foreign market, though many are inexperienced newcomers compared to their overseas counterparts. And the State Office, by the way, is the political organ of the Chinese Political Bureau. The NDRC has streamlined the application process to facilitate Chinese companies' overseas investment. Most investments only require a record on file with no lengthy verification procedure, Zhou said. The NDRC will continue to encourage Chinese companies to go overseas and negotiate and cooperate with participating countries along the Belt and Road to bring down the cost of cooperation. And by negotiating and cooperating with participating countries, they mean largely with overseas Chinese communities in those countries. Efforts will also be made to improve overseas security and to lower operational risks. Zhang Shifu, a deputy head of the department responsible for outward investment and economic cooperation under the Ministry of Commerce, told the forum that more than 70% of the Chinese companies overseas are profiting. By 2016, a total of 77 projects have taken shape in 36 countries and regions with a total investment of $24.19 billion. These Chinese-led projects will add more than $70 billion in value and create over 212,000 jobs. China will continue to outshine others at a time when the developed countries are expected to remain mired in economic stagnation, quote unquote, said Justin Yaifu Lin, former World Bank chief economist. Speaking at the forum, he added that the economy of China would remain robust and serve as the world's economic engine. Behind the growing prosperity are a number of Chinese financial institutions that have been providing constant support to the companies. According to Sun Ping, vice president of the Export-Import Bank, of China, the bank has supported a total of 1,279 Belt and Road projects, with the loan balance exceeding 671.4 billion RMB, renminbi, the yuan, up 18.28%. Meanwhile, the total investment projects support the Silk Road Fund has topped $80 billion US, said the fund's executive vice president Deng Guorong. We should be aware that financing demand in Belt and Road construction is huge. This demand cannot be met by the fund or any single Chinese financial institution, Deng noted, adding that the Silk Road Fund has established cooperative ties with a dozen international financial institutions on possible bilateral or multilateral cooperation opportunities, unquote. And that brings us to conclusion of this lecture 60B on the role of the overseas Chinese community. Brings us up to date with the role of that community in the current Belt and Road Initiative program that connects China to Europe through Africa and Asia, and concludes those lectures for Volume 3 of Communism in East Asia. And in our next volume, Volume 4, which I'm currently working on, we'll have available sometime next year, and that will be on communism in Oceania.